All right, we got the green lights, so let's go ahead and start. It's about 10:02. Welcome to the Spring 19 UEAC meeting. You should have an agenda and a packet in front of you. Included in the packet is an updated handout on one of the Senate bills that we'll be discussing later this morning. But for now, we're on agenda item 1. I'm calling the meeting to order. My name is Julie Penley, and I serve as the co-chair of this committee. I would like to go ahead and start with everyone introducing themselves, and then we'll do some light housekeeping, and then we'll move into the agenda proper.
Good morning, I'm Dan Brown from Texas State University in San Marcos.
Good morning, I'm Kyla Torre. I'm here at the coordinating board.
Hi, Terry Longacre from the University of Houston.
Good morning, Billy Anderson, Tyler Junior College.
I'm Susan Allen from West Texas A&M University.
Good morning, I'm Heather Hicks from Cisco College in Cisco and Abilene.
Good morning, Hope Corey, the University of Texas at Dallas.
Hi, I'm Eugenia Harris from Austin College in Sherman.
Good morning, Larry Abram from the University of Texas at Austin.
Elva LeBlanc, Tarrant County College.
John Quincinella, University of North Texas in Denton.
Marilyn Kaplan, University of Texas at Dallas.
Omer Guevara, Northwest Vista College, Alamo Colleges in San Antonio.
Crystal Seahorn, University of Houston Clear Lake.
Ed Byerly, Victoria College.
Janet Turillo, Stephen F. Austin State University.
Elizabeth Howard, Texas Wesleyan University.
Frank Graves, McLennan Community College.
Good morning, Stephanie Borst, Texas Tech University.
Good morning, Kevin Wood, North Central Texas College.
And I'm Reinhold Cornelius. I'm with the coding board. Welcome all for coming to the UEAC. Good to see so many here.
Great, thank you. A little bit of housekeeping, as I mentioned. If I could remind everyone to turn the volume down on their devices. We are recording. We do have we have somebody calling in today?
I'm on the line. Monica Villarreal, Texas State Technical College.
Great, thank you, Monica. We are recording, and so to increase the clarity of the recording, if we can turn our devices off, and also when we are speaking on the mic near you, there is a button that will light up red when your mic is hot. So to minimize the reverb and to increase the clarity of the recording, when you're done speaking, if you can turn that mic off, that would be terrific, and then you have no awkward conversations making it into the record. And I know that most of us can use our teacher voice just fine, but if you could lean into the mic to make sure that your voice is picked up for the recording, that would be terrific. In front of you, you should also have an envelope with the payment for lunch if you opted into that. And remember that the board will also be asking us to document our expenses, including our time that we are devoting to this committee for their reporting. So we'll be doing that electronically after the meeting. Is there anything else on housekeeping? Okay, so having addressed that, item number 2, consideration of summary notes from the January 11th meeting. Those are found starting on page 9 of your packet.
And if you recall, the January meeting was not a regular meeting, and you discussed the question of semester credit hours, and you came up with a list of pros and cons, so to speak, which we collected in draft form, and the draft version is in the minutes. You had voted on them at the meeting, so we reprinted them into the minutes. And the staff version, that means the version which was edited for grammar and punctuation, etc., which I sent out in January to the members, is then in agenda item 4. And we look at that briefly, but you had seen that after the meeting through email. That's how I organized it in the materials.
Okay, so focusing on the summary notes themselves under item 2, is there any discussion or clarification on those needed? Larry.
I move we approve these as written, just to get them out on the floor.
Okay, thank you. We've got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, thank you.
Well, our next agenda item this morning is going to be one that, first of all, I'd like to begin by thanking our co-chair, Julie Penley, for all of her work as a leader on this UEAC. Unfortunately, her term is coming to an end. So with that in mind, if we turn to page 4, we can begin the process of considering candidates to serve as the new co-chair for next year representing the 2-year institutions. As a reminder, we've gone to a process where we are alternating the 2-year and 4-year replacements. So I will continue as co-chair representing the 4-year institutions next year, but we'll need to have someone to join us as Julie's replacement for next year as co-chair representing 2-year institutions. Obviously, only those community colleges which have a member who is not leaving the board, leaving the committee, this year, are eligible. So those who are concluding their terms in 2019, Victoria College, Tyler Junior College are not eligible for this role at this point. But at this time, I would welcome nominations, including self-nominations, to serve as the next co-chair representing the community colleges on UEAC.
Well, I haven't discussed this with him, so it's a surprise, but I'd like to nominate Kevin Wood.
So we have a nomination of Kevin Wood. We'll offer, are you willing to accept the nomination, Kevin? Kevin Wood of North Central Texas College has accepted his nomination to be the next community college representative in UEAC leadership. Are there other nominations at this time? I'm tempted to say, remember, oftentimes the person who's not present is the one who's nominated for these roles. So it's nice, Kevin, you were here. That worked out nicely. Other nominations from the 2-year institutions for the representative as co-chair of the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee for next year. Seeing none, I would like to ask for a vote by acclamation for approval of Kevin Wood as our future co-chair representing the 2-year institutions on the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? And Kevin remained quiet. Any abstentions? If not, thank you, Kevin Wood, for agreeing to join us in leadership of the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee.
I am dumbfounded and honored. Thank you, Eva. I appreciate that. I hope I don't let you down. That's my greatest fear, is that I would do something that would take away from this distinguished group. But I do appreciate the honor, and I appreciate the nomination.
Well, we appreciate you, Kevin, and again, on behalf of the committee, Julie, thank you for all that you've done in leading the charge for the 2-year institutions as co-chair of the UEAC. We'll move on to agenda item number 4, and this is the consideration of the final draft of discussion points for the core curriculum semester credit hours. Essentially, this is located, I believe, on page, got to look again, beginning on page, 15 of our packet. So if we look on page 15, I'd like to briefly give an explanation of what this reflects compared to the work that we approved in the summary notes, and then I'll ask Reinhold to chime in if he'd like to share more. Essentially, what the coordinating board staff have done is take the notes that were gathered during our called meeting in January and add some language, adjust some language, modify some language here and there. So before we think about that any further, I'd like to ask Reinhold to add some information from his perspective.
Yes, we basically edited it and also in an attempt to make the pros and cons look parallel. Because as you recall, there were two subgroups who did it and a little bit different ways of summarizing it. So we ordered it to make it look parallel, and that was no substantive change to the draft, and we sent it out to you in January. And after we did that, I shared this version with our leadership in the agency. And just because we did this, there's always the word draft on it, and I put it in here that you have a chance to, or you have, to speak up about it if there's something you don't agree with. And once you agree with it, then we take the draft off and keep it.
We went through the process to develop these pros and cons, not with the respect of taking a position per se, but to providing input to the coordinating board staff that they could share with others then, helping to understand kind of the nuts and bolts, the details of these proposals. So is there any input, any suggestions regarding the final draft of discussion points that have been provided? Yes, Larry.
I have a suggestion. I appreciate the modifications from the original summary to this version that try to streamline it. But in the section of arguments for reduction of semester credit hours, it seems to me that number 4, which is on the next page, that says the additional 6 semester credit hours outside the core should serve as degree requirement or for elective credit on the degree plan in order to qualify for federal financial aid. Probably would be better as a bullet under number 2, which asks what happens to the 6 semester credit hours that are being removed. So it could be a new bullet, but it could also be added, for instance, to the 3rd bullet or the 4th bullet. I don't know. I can see it maybe best as just a separate bullet, but it's really addressing what should happen to those, and it's saying, well, it would be good if they remained a degree credit so that they would count for financial aid.
So we have a suggestion for revision to be considered by the coordinating board staff?
Well, it was actually, the original version had it as separate item. We didn't change this. And this, it was number 4 in the original draft. If you go to the minutes.
Yes, I understand.
So, we can do that however you like.
So just to make sure, the proposal that's been suggested, and I use proposal loosely, essentially the suggestion for revision that has been made is that item number 4, under the arguments for the reduction in semester credit hours, which states the additional 6 semester credit hours outside the core curriculum should serve as a degree requirement or for elective credit on the degree plan in order to qualify for federal financial aid. So the suggestion is that perhaps that's not appropriately a standalone item. Larry, is that stating kind of what you're saying? And that indeed it reflects what happens to the 6 SCH of the CAO under item 2 as an additional bullet. That's just a friendly suggestion to coordinating board staff, I believe. Are there any other thoughts about that particular suggestion? Any other input regarding that?
Fine with me.
Thank you, John, from University of North Texas. So we do have a couple of our four-year institutions that are indicating their interest in having that be relocated, if I can use that term, under topic number 2, under arguments for the reduction in the semester credit hours of the Texas core curriculum. We'll provide that input to coordinating board staff. Reinhold, is that something you can consider at this point?
Yeah, we can do that. It's no problem.
Well, thank you, Larry, for bringing forward the suggestion. Any other suggestions? We have two sides of this coin that we discussed. Does anyone have any thoughts on the other component that we discussed in our working group meeting? Yes, Larry.
Well, so I've thought about this a little bit, and I think we even discussed it a little bit at our last meeting. And I don't know that it belongs in the document, but I think it's worth remembering or reminding that at the last meeting, the suggestion was that we divide into 2 subgroups to deal with these 2 perspectives, pros and cons of this idea. And it struck me then that the majority of the representatives who chose to go to these 2 groups fell largely along the difference between 4-year and 2-year institutions. And so I think the majority of the people in the group dealing with pros were from 4-year institutions, and the majority of those dealing with cons were from 2-year institutions. And I'm wondering, so if the group were to vote, should this or shouldn't this happen, would that be the same thing that happened? But also, I will say, because of a lot of work that I've been doing since that meeting, it occurred to me that something that's not mentioned here but might be good to mention is, and some people say it's a pro and some it's a con, I don't know, is that reducing the number of hours in the core curriculum could predictably increase the number of students who would be transferring having completed the core. And so would benefit from that blanket core complete, don't have to take any other core courses. And I don't know why we didn't put that as a pro, but to me it seems like one, that there is that value of having completed a core when you transfer that means that the receiving institution doesn't have you take additional for core requirements, which sometimes trip people up. So I don't know whether anyone else feels like that's a pro that could be added, or whether that's a time bomb ticking that we don't want to talk about, or what.
Yes.
I'd like to react to that. So if we are going to be student-focused and really moving in the direction of supporting the students, and the state is not going to enforce the common fields of study, it seems that at least we should insist that each university publish its own unique 60 lower division hours plan with ACGM courses, so that it could be satisfied by students at a community college. This should be an electronic database, easily searchable by all students and advisors across the state. So it's not a secret, it's more transparent. So the pros, as you state, the universities are preserving your flexibility and independence at the potential cost to students. And with excess credit hours, expended financial aid, and increased debt obstacles that often derail the students. So I do think, I'm not sure where this would fit, but there needs to be more transparency in terms of supporting the students. So the students can know upfront from the very beginning when they're being advised what courses are going to be accepted by the universities and honored when they get there. You know, support some of the things that we know help the students from the very beginning.
Kevin,
Go ahead.
Kevin Wood, North Central Texas. I'd like to take what Elvis said one step farther. We in the lower division are so focused on advising these students when they come in and trying to get them properly placed where they need to be. And the real world is they don't all come in the same. I wish they did, but they don't. If upper division universities would publish those 1,000, 2,000 level courses that they would require for the various majors, then we could do a better job advising, and we could truly benefit that student by making sure that whatever they think they want to be, they at least have a pathway, they have a track that they know they can follow, and it makes it easier for the lower division community colleges to place those students where they belong.
Okay. I'm going to jump in here. We do have a guest, and I want to be respectful of his time. As a historical reminder, this conversation of the advantages or disadvantages of adjusting the core was an internal exercise that the board asked us to help them with, to help them communicate with the legislatures in the bills that they were drafting. We do have some of that resulting legislative action in our packet, and so some of these conversations are now moot or apparently moot given the current language in the Senate Bill 25 and in the House Bill 4018. So these conversations are still important for the coordinating board staff and for us to think about philosophically, but it seems that the legislature has moved forward. And with that, I would like to welcome our guest, John Wyatt, who will walk us through agenda item 5, and we can have some of these conversations maybe in the context of these bills.
Again, I'm John Wyatt. I am Director of External Relations here at the Coordinating Board. And so my team and I, we work with the legislature during the session. We work to inform them regarding the board's policy recommendations. We also work to analyze and monitor all bills that impact higher education. So as things stand right now, we're tracking about 500 pieces of legislation that impact higher education in some regard. I won't go through all of those. But there were some bills that are obviously of high interest to this committee that I wanted to give you an update on where things stand. As mentioned, transfer has been a big issue this session. SB 25 in the Senate and HB 4018 in the House are the two bills that are moving in regards to transfer, and those are the bills around which the discussion has happened. You may be aware that earlier in the session, Senator Royce West, who's the sponsor of SB 25, convened a stakeholder group to discuss transfer. So that group included representatives from universities, community and technical colleges, state colleges, as well as the coordinating board. And that work group really kind of worked through a lot of different options, a lot of different positions on transfer. And where we stand today, SB 25 was passed out of the Senate earlier this week. HB 4018 it passed out of committee on the House side. So just to give you some of the highlights of those two bills, in SB 25, there is a reporting requirement on non-transferable credit requiring that the general academic institution provide the coordinating board a report on any course that for which the student transfers to the institution does not receive academic credit. That is not currently in 4018. There are requirements in both bills for students at a university to file a degree plan by the 30th semester credit hour, as well as for dual credit students to submit a degree plan at 15 semester credit hours. There are recommendations in both bills that institutions develop course sequences for each of their undergraduate and certificates they offer. Both bills include a section regarding articulation agreements, essentially encouraging institutions to engage in articulation agreements with their between the 2-year and the 4-year sectors. One difference between the two is that SB 25 requires those articulation agreements to the greatest extent practicable to include fields of study. HB 4018 has somewhat softer language that says that they may include the fields of study. SB 25 would allow fields of study and programs of study dual credit courses to be formula funded. That language is not in 4018. I'm going to skip over the core curriculum, but we'll come back to that. And really, the other elements are relatively minor, but the big conversation has been around the core curriculum and what the legislature wants to do to make the core more useful as a transfer vehicle. And so where things stand right now is there's been a lot of conversation about having a general core and then an academic discipline core. And so that's been kind of a focus of the conversation, and where both bills stand right now is they would restructure the core so that you would have a 30-hour general core and then a 12-hour academic discipline core. And those academic disciplines would be developed by the coordinating board in consultation with institutions. The idea being that students who perhaps don't know precisely what major they want to pursue, but do know what academic area they're interested in, would know what core courses they could take that are going to count toward majors in that discipline when they transfer. So I will say that this has been easily the biggest sticking point, I think, between the 2-year sector and the 4-year sector is how to divide the core, or even whether it's a wise idea to divide the core along those lines. As I said, both bills currently have it at 30-12, but I would not assume that that is the final disposition of this. It's passed the Senate. It's over in the House. As I said, it passed out of House Committee. Very likely that there's going to be an amendment or amendments on the House floor regarding this. It's also very likely that the two chambers will pass different versions of the bill, and so they're going to have to come to some kind of accommodation in a conference committee to work out the differences there. But again, I will say this is a major focus of the legislature. The fact that the Senate bill was SB 25 is an indicator, because that low bill number means that it's something that the Lieutenant Governor and the Senate identified as this is an issue that's important to us. And so we really want to move legislation this session. Let me kind of stop there. There's other legislation I can talk about, but I assume we want to have a conversation about this.
Do we have questions or discussion points? Edward.
It looks to me like under this proposal, social sciences are being taken out of the core in general. Is that a fair conclusion? I mean, it looks to me like rather than having 12, it used to be, I recall, 9 hours of math and physical sciences. Now we have 12 hours of math and physical sciences, and social sciences are no longer included in that.
And my reading in terms of the general core, yes. The general core is limited to what's specified here in the bill. But again, there's still a lot of conversation about where that dividing line of what the requirements should be between the general core and these academic disciplinary cores.
if I could follow up on that question, I want to first make sure everyone's looking at the update materials that you had at your location when you arrived for the meeting. And on page 13, just to follow up on that question, on that statement, if I could, the general core of 30 semester credit hours, 6 American or Texas history, 6 government or political science, 6 of communication, 3 of language, philosophy, and culture, and 3 of creative arts. So 6, 12, 18, 21, 24. So to Edward's question about social sciences, I look at the language above, including, but how do we get from 24 to 30? Is that an institutional option, perhaps, in those areas?
That's actually a good question. Does not seem that it's stated in the bill.
No. Dan Brown from Texas State. I was looking again at the use of including, but it does not. Just a clarification for staff to continue to review at the coordinating board level.
I think we can look at it. You know, obviously, I mean, the language says that it must have the following components, but there's still
6 hours.
Yeah, those 6 hours, and you know, again, we'll have to talk about it, but it seems like through rule we would be able to have a better definition as to what.
But then,
including that 6 hours.
in theory, you could be bumping the core up higher or above 42 then, no?
I don't think the difference we're having here is that it says 30 semester credit hours of general core, but then these components only add up to 24.
So it's leaving math and science entirely out of the general core?
Yes.
As currently defined, it's not requiring them in the general core.
As well as social and behavioral science?
That is correct.
Well, math and physical sciences are in the what's called the discipline core, and it's actually 3 hours more than in the current core, because it's 12.
So yeah, if you go on to read for the academic courses, the academic discipline core of not more than 12 hours will include relevant courses in math and physical science.
And currently it's 9 hours of, that's 6 hours of life and physical sciences and 3 hours of math. So this increases it by 3 hours.
Well, so, again, my understanding, so the language here is that the academic disciplinary core will be 12 hours and that it has to include math and physical science. So within that 12 hours.
I'm sorry, can you tell me again, where is the specification of math and science?
If you're looking at the updated, it's end of 13, top of 14.
Question, and Reinhold just hit on it. It says physical sciences, being a chemist, that's a physical science. Does that really include life and physical science?
I think it would include what we currently call the natural sciences or the lab sciences, so biology, geology, physics. But I'm not a lawyer, not a legislative member, but it seems as though the 30 hours, right, there's a discrepancy of 6 hours, and there's a discrepancy of 3 hours in what we would call the major or the academic discipline core. So unless the legislature is going to redefine the 9 component areas, we still don't know where social behavioral science or the 6 hours of component area option are going to fit. And I guess that's where the negotiated rulemaking may come in.
A point of, my reading of the statute, the proposed statute, is different than what's been stated. So the way that I'm reading this is that the academic discipline core must contain a math course and a physical science course, but it does not say that it must be all of those things.
I think you're correct.
Yep, but that's been stated twice now, that it must be all math and all physical science. So I want to make sure that if my reading is correct.
That is an important point to clarify, that the language is that it must include relevant courses in math and physical sciences, but the whole idea of the academic core is to have it structured around the needs of that particular academic discipline. So it is not limited just to those math and science courses.
And do you think it would allow a program area or an academic discipline area to decide that there are no relevant courses in physical science and so not have any?
I don't think that that's anticipated, because I think that there's an understanding that some math and science is necessary in all academic disciplines. And I would certainly read the intent here as the inclusion of some math and science in those academic cores.
So if it's relevant for all degrees, then why isn't it in the general part of the core? I mean, the proposed general.
Well, because different disciplines have different math requirements, for example. Somebody who goes into social science may need statistics, whereas another might need college algebra.
That's true, I agree, but even right now, we have different math courses within our choices within our core.
Well, and again, I think the idea behind these academic disciplinary cores is really getting the student to focus on, what math can I take? I know I want to be a social sciences major. What math should I really be taking in the core that's going to be relevant when I decide what specific major I want to pursue?
And there's a sense that that's not happening now?
Well, I think the concern that the legislature has had is that, yes, students, particularly with the core, there's not a lot of direction in terms of what core courses should I be taking that are particularly going to apply toward whatever major I end up in. And I know a lot of the conversation has been around, the core. You can take courses and be core complete, but it's important to take core courses that are going to end up counting toward your degree within your major. And I think that's part of the impetus behind these academic disciplinary cores.
So from a four-year institution standpoint, the vast majority of our students that are freshmen are in a major. And they're being advised in that major to take courses from the list of courses we have in the core that are relevant for their major. And for transfer students that come in, they come in saying, I want this major. And relevant to the previous note, we publish online what courses are required for that major, and they can be advised to take core courses. I don't understand how this improves things.
Well, I think, again, the idea is that, if you're a student at a two-year institution, you're intending to transfer, and again, broadly what you're interested in studying when you get to university. Knowing what courses in the core you should really focus on first that are going to count toward that discipline. I know that's the logic of it. I'm not versed enough in the core to speak to the mechanics of it, but that's what the legislature was trying to address.
And someone who wants to be a sociology major doesn't have a chance to take a sociology course in the core because there is no longer a social behavioral sciences area in the core.
Well, and again, I think that is something that we need to clarify in terms of where that would fall within either the general or the academic disciplinary cores, because as we've noted, currently there's a 30-hour general, but only 24 of it is specified within the statute.
Crystal Seahorn, University of Houston, Clear Lake. John, can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm new, so I may say something that's not appropriate, but I can't help but wonder, given our conversation that we just had, why the component area option isn't listed and why the social and behavioral sciences isn't listed. And I know you said that that's part of the ongoing conversation, but it makes me a little concerned that maybe there's a stepping stone in place to continue to pull back on some of these courses.
Well, and I can't speak specifically to why those decisions were made in the legislature. All I can really tell you is that, this has been kind of an intense focus of, and frankly, an intense matter of disagreement among, not just between the 2- and 4-year sectors, but frankly among institutions within those sectors in terms of what this general core versus academic disciplinary core split should look like. So I do think that there's still a lot of negotiation ongoing in order to decide that. The value, I think, of this conversation today is making sure we understand the perspectives that y'all have so we can communicate those to legislators.
Billy Anderson, Tyler Junior College. Are there any guarantees for the student that only completes part of the course? So if we have two areas of the core, the general and the academic discipline, and a student completes the general but not the academic discipline, when they move to the upper level university, are they considered core complete in the general? Or because they didn't do the entire core, are they going the whole 42 hours? Could they be told, no, you're not core complete, and then their general could be picked apart again?
My understanding of the language is that if you do complete the general core, it is transferable as the general core.
John Quintanilla, University of North Texas. I had a question on the change that was made from the draft that was emailed to us to that we have now on page 15. I'll specifically quote the language. A student shall receive academic credit toward the applicable disciplinary course requirements for the student's degree program for each of the courses transferred and may not be required to take additional core curriculum, general core curriculum, or academic discipline core curriculum as applicable at the receiving institution. As I read this, this tells me that if a student takes algebra, pre-cal, Cal 1 physics, say, for a core from transfer, then they cannot be required to take any other math course necessary for the degree and have to go straight into Cal 3 without all the intermediate steps. If I'm reading this right, that's what this is saying. I think that's an incredibly bad idea.
I'm sorry, you're on page 15 of the updated materials?
Page 15 of the revised one that was given to us. And this is new language that was not in the email that was sent to us earlier this week. Again, a student shall receive academic credit for the applicable disciplinary course requirements for the student's degree program for each of the courses transferred and may not be required to take additional core curriculum, general core curriculum, or academic discipline core curriculum. The last one is a sticky one, additional academic discipline core curriculum. So if a student comes in core complete, this is acting like a field of study. You cannot take any additional lower level courses that happen to be in the core curriculum. I think this is a tremendously bad idea.
John, if you would, because I think it might be informative to our members and others who may be listening, what would be an example, you've kind of hinted at one, but a specific example perhaps with one of your degree programs at the University of North Texas where this could be an application?
Okay, so I'm imagining, so let me talk about the field that I know best, mathematics. I imagine that the academic core curriculum would contain courses in, let me start listing possible things that would go. Algebra, pre-calculus, calculus 1, physics 1, physics 2, chemistry 1, chemistry 2, computer science 1. These are things that would make sense for a freshman to take at the community college level before coming to four-year school. The way the statute reads, if you take 4 of those, you're done. And you cannot take anything else. And so, for example, if they took algebra and 3 science classes, that would meet the requirement. They would finish the academic core, and we could not require them to take pre-cal, Cal 1, or Cal 2, and they have to launch into the higher level courses without the intermediate things. That's, as I read the statute, would be required, and that is an extremely bad idea.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to follow up with you on that and find out what the intention is of this language and whether it needs to be clarified.
I'd like to raise another concern. It's about the whole, the 6 hours that aren't specified in the general. It seems to me that we've gone around a few times where we're held accountable to SACs to say that we have to have at least a 30-hour general education curriculum. And I'm not sure that they would accept an academic discipline core as part of that. So having the 30 hours is going to be really important to know exactly what it is and how it's a general education. And to not specify 6 of the hours, for instance, I don't know whether a component area option version of those 6 hours would fly for SACs. We've been in great shape because we have a 42-hour and we have 30 hours or 36 hours that are specified by component areas that are all gen ed. But someone's going to have to figure out what happens in that 6 hours, I think, for us to be able to hold that standard. And as each of our institutional accreditations say, we have general education, not disciplinary requirements that meet the SACs 30 hours. And so it seems to me that one possibility would be to put there a math class, a science class, right, or a social and behavioral science class. So we've got some breadth there. And then the academic disciplines that want to go further can add to those. But leaving it as a whole seems dangerous to me and wrong.
Kevin Wood, North Central. John, I want to ask a follow-up question. When I read the passage that you referenced there on page 15, says may not be required to take additional core curriculum, general core curriculum, or academic discipline core curriculum courses as applicable. If a student came into UNT and they were going into your engineering program and they had the algebra, would it not be applicable for them to take the calculus and the diff EQ, and that would be?
That's a very vague interpretation of two words. If that's the intent, I can live with that, but it really needs to be worded better.
I agree with that.
Yep.
Stephanie from Texas Tech, if a student completes the proposed general 30-hour core plus an academic specific 12-hour core, but then decides to change their major, will those 12 hours still count for them? If the whole purpose is to help students not lose hours and graduate on time.
Well, I mean, my understanding is that it has to transfer and count as that academic disciplinary core. So I see what you're saying.
A lot of students do change their major.
Well, and
several times.
You are correct. And I mean, obviously the challenge we have around transfer in general is that there's no one way to fix it due to student choice, due to the lots of different ways students end up transferring and making decisions about how they're going to pursue their education. So again, I don't think this solves transfer, and I hope it's not being interpreted that way or portrayed that way. But the idea is to say, again, you've at least got something you know you can take in the core within a discipline that's going to count toward majors in that discipline.
If I can follow up with your question, this is the question I also had when I was reading this, is that if we switch majors from one to another, obviously those 12 hours would need to be, the 12 hours in the new major would have to be taken. So would that student be deemed core complete because they've finished the 42, but guess what, you still need to take those 12 hours in the new major because you switched. That wasn't obvious at all from the reading.
Again, my understanding is that in that case, the student would be general core complete. They would be academic discipline core complete for that academic discipline. But you're right, if they're pursuing a major outside of that academic discipline, then they would have to take the relevant courses for that other discipline.
John, it's just my thought. I think following up on what both Stephanie and John mentioned there, is some reflection on the impact of of change of major, internal transfer would be important to clarify for four-year institutions especially, because what happens with those hours is something that we would need to deal with on the degree audit and consider. So just from that standpoint, clarifying what Stephanie and John in particular have said with respect to the impact of an internal transfer or change of major could be really important.
Excuse me, if you don't mind, this is Janet Turlo from Stephen F. Austin State University. I'd like to go back to John and John's assumption of the change of majors, and I just want to clarify it for me. If a student comes in with the 30 general core, they're complete, but they've taken these 12 hours in one major and now they want to change to another major, they would not be considered, just bottom line, they would not be considered core complete as they transfer to a new major. Is that correct?
Well, and again, I'm not the expert here, but what I believe this legislation contemplates is that you would be complete for your 30-hour general core.
Correct.
You would be complete for that academic disciplinary core, but then if you're going into a major that is not within that academic discipline, you would still have to do the core courses within that discipline.
Okay, so for a student who's, let's say, a biology major, and I'm core complete, I'm coming in, I'm core complete, it would behoove me then to change my major after I've completed 42 hours. Because if we're talking about saving students money and cost, it's beneficial to me to not change my major until I come into a college core complete then. Is that, I mean,
that's obviously something we're going to have to clarify.
okay?
I would think that would, when a student changes the major, I don't think that they could get around that. Because by the time they are ready to cross that finish line, the degree audit, it's still going to show you didn't take the right area courses. You're still deficit in the 12 hours. So I think it sounds like we're talking about, could a student be counted as core complete for the 42 if they change their major officially as a senior, for example? Is that kind of like what you're asking? Or
it also goes back to SB 25 stating that they have to now declare it 30 hours.
Right.
So now I'm kind of worried about the courses that they're going to take, what's going to be acceptable, degree paths, crosswalks, the whole bit, to really do what I think is the intent of the bill, is to help that transfer student in a timely graduation take the right courses and reduce debt. I mean, that's what I'm reading.
So that's where the articulation agreements would come in. That's where the onus would be on the counselors, the advisors, the faculty, the students, to ensure that they've maybe done some academic counseling or some career counseling to make sure that they have narrowed down their area of study before that. But I don't think that a student can change their major further down and then be given credit for, I think that 12 hours is still going to be
So they're still,
held.
basically, they're going to be missing at least 6 hours somewhere.
Again, I mean, I don't know if anybody isn't a lawyer in this room, but that's how I'm reading it, is that the 12 hours is specific to the meta major, area of study, whatever you want to call it. But
And I have to go back to, and jumping ahead to the September 1, 2019 effective date. I'm a little worried for the four-year institutions about that major shift in that 30 to 40, because our policy says you'll have a degree declared at 45. Well, now, if this is in effect September 1, it's going to be a major shift for 4 years.
One clarification of that. So that's the enactment date, September 1, 2019.
But we have till December of 20. Is that
So yeah, if you look up, I think it's section.
It's 15.
14
yeah.
and 15 specify. So some sections apply beginning the 21-22 academic year. And then 15 is that the coordinating board shall develop a recommended core curriculum by December 31st, 2020.
So we have a year
Yeah.
to make these changes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, these are things where we can provide feedback to legislators about, if there's a due date that just isn't realistic, about trying to have that amended.
Because in that due date, you would have to convene the community colleges in 4 years to kind of flush out what those academic discipline courses would be.
We are required to work with faculty at 2-year and 4-year institutions to develop these revisions.
And given the work that, like the field of study and program said, it seemed like that's been a pretty significant undertaking by the coordinating board, and is from a time standpoint, that may be unrealistic to anticipate, to meet that expectation.
Along those lines, I'm surprised that this language says that there are no fiscal implications, because I don't think any of us think that this is going to be a free and easy change. We're going to have to change programming, we're going to have to change advising, we're going to have to spend a lot of time and personnel effort.
Here's the dirty secret about how LBB calculates fiscal notes. So when the Legislative Budget Board is putting a fiscal note on a bill, they're looking at impact to GR, so state general revenue. Generally, costs incurred by institutions are not considered to be GR costs.
We're going to spend state money to do it.
We advise the LBB that there will be costs on institutions in coming into compliance with them, but again, it's a technical matter for them that they're only looking at what is the immediate state GR cost of complying with the bill. That's just how they do it.
Janet, I want to go back to your question. It seems to me if a student has completed the 30-hour general core and it is starting to work on, or has started to work on, the 12-hour meta major, but now decides to change. It's less expensive for them to stop doing that, transfer, finish the 12-hour. They're going to get the credit that their general core as core complete. That's a separate designation, and then they're going to have to do the new disciplinary one anyway. Why take extra ones in the old major? It just seems like that's paying extra money.
That's a solid point. I'm trying to get as many hours for our students at the community college level for cost efficiency purposes as well. I'm just concerned about, and we all have that one student or those two students who, I want to be a teacher today, but tomorrow I want to be an accountant. And I want to save as many credit hours as we possibly can. And you probably have a good point, Larry, in that if we can do our advising and our crosswalks early, we can catch those students. I'm concerned about the dual credit influx. I'm concerned about, as someone else has recently said, how to bring all of us together to the table to start really diving down into what this means. I think that there's some implications. I'm looking at prereqs. We were talking about examples. For instance, chemistry. We have a program that requires 2 prereqs. We're going to now have to move them to the upper level division. That's not cost efficient for a student who's a chemist. Now, I don't know why anybody would want to be a chemistry major, but that's not necessarily a cost efficient plan. Kevin, unless it's Kevin. I'm just concerned that the steps that are in this bill that haven't even been explored yet, and I realize it's new, it's fresh, people haven't had a chance to talk about it yet, but we do have to start having these conversations about what it's going to mean for us at 4-level, what it's going to mean for our 2+2 partners at the community colleges, especially for the students, advising, transferability. I'm just concerned about those things. And chemistry.
Back to what Janet just said, this is Marilyn Kaplan, University of Texas at Dallas. The students, and most of them do change majors.
At least 3 times.
At least 3 times, right? Mm-hmm. And we have, between this academic discipline core and the field of study, we're tying up every single course in the first 60 hours with 0 flexibility, which means that somebody who changes majors throws away an awful lot of hours, and then suddenly they are in excessive hours, because they could easily lose, with a 30-hour general core, they could lose 30 hours. If they're between field of study and academic discipline core. And since most students change majors, this means we're looking at excessive hours for most students.
So I think Marilyn and Janet are absolutely right. We have had this issue in a different form all along, though, because a student in the current core, a student could still be core complete and then transfer or change their major at the same institution, and suddenly they're designated as core complete, but now they don't have the correct program courses, and so they're still racking up additional courses. So I don't know that this bill significantly changes that, because a student has always been in jeopardy if they change their mind.
Can I ask a question out of ignorance? I'd imagine students do change their majors quite often. How often do they change their majors well beyond the current? I mean, it obviously depends on how we define these academic disciplinary cores. But how common is it to go from, mathematics to history?
So in my position, I get 5 to 10 major changes a day. Okay? Of those, we are actually changing our policy in the School of Management to stop change of majors after 60 hours because the problem is so huge. So with all of this definition, somebody coming in at 60 hours who decides, I want something else, can't get into the School of Management if they started on a different path.
This is Stephanie from Texas Tech. I just know from our largest department, which is biology, of all the students that start biology, only 28% actually graduate biology. And the ones that change their major change to all over the university.
Yeah, I would say that one big factor for major change is students struggle or fail in a preliminary course. So they want to get a degree in business, but they're not prepared to finish calculus, and they don't, and so they are going into an entirely different area. Or they want to be in sciences, and they struggle with physics or chemistry. They get out of the sciences. So a lot of major changes go into different, what you would think of as, what this calls broad disciplines or meta majors or whatever. Some of it is driven by, oh, I just learned about a great new thing I never heard about, and that could be a slight variation from where they thought they were going, or a big change. But the biggest single factor I see is struggling with foundational level courses. And it's not always the first course, it could be the second course. You know, it may not be pre-cal, it could be calculus. And so I would say a large number of the students we see changing majors would be tracked into a different so-called academic discipline.
And to add to that, excuse me, would be the requirements for some of our programs with a GPA. You have to, as far as teaching, you have to have a 2.75. Well, if you don't have your 2.75, then it falls to us to help you craft some sort of degree with the hours that you have, trying to prevent you from taking additional hours. So another example is our nursing students. You have to have a certain GPA. Well, then we have to try to provide you some sort of a degree plan that maybe moves you then to a health science field that allows you to stay with your love of sciences or nursing, but still crafts you a degree before you waste too many hours. So what we've done is try to match those movements within our own colleges. If somebody is moving out of the College of Education, are they moving then into the College of Sciences and Mathematics? We're trying to be on top of that as well.
This is Terry Longacre from the University of Houston. We see the same types of issues at our institution with students moving, changing majors to and from very different disciplines. And so that does concern me, same as some of the earlier conversation about potential excess credits with this 12-hour discipline, academic discipline core curriculum, because the students moving from biology to something non-science, they're going to have different 12-hour requirement.
And John, if I could, I'm going to pivot to more of the practical boots on the ground perspective. If we look on page 19. So is it my interpretation correct that the new, if approved, if this passes, for the fall 21 native freshmen, we would have now a new core curriculum?
Yes.
And the reason, now I'm going to back that up, because as I look at the calendar, so the coordinating board, the act takes effect next September. The coordinating board has to convene the statewide groups for governance to have input into what those, first of all, defining what the meta majors are, and secondly, then bringing faculty together to make the second step, which is define what the academically based core would be. I think it would be helpful as you inform legislators to what extent it would have an impact at this date, but we'll be in the midst of curriculum approval processes by December 2020, and we'll be advising new students for fall 21 using that material. I bring this up because many of us in the room may remember the core approval process of 2014. And we were waiting on, it's going to be the burden, because I'm assuming it's the same process, that institutions will have to provide their proposed core to the coordinating board staff for approval, as we did in 2014 with that revision. I just want that, this calendar is aspirational.
I like that phrasing.
John Quintanilla, UNT. Hopefully, at least some of this could carry over, right? Or we have to start complete from scratch. So, I mean, the same categories exist in large part that exist now, so hopefully some of this could carry over to the new arrangement if this passes. Just a hope.
I agree, John, but I do think, especially as we think about what the impact of the second part, the 12-hour core, is the part that I think could be time-consuming for approval.
I'd like to bring up a point that I think was mentioned earlier, but then maybe got lost, which is that we really have two things in play here to help students as they, in their first couple of years, are preparing for the rigors of the upper level major. One already in place is field of study. And now this other, in a sense, may overlap significantly. And yet it may not in a way so that it starts to prescribe even more. And I wonder whether there's really a need for the what's called academic discipline core, since we have many lower division courses specified, some of which could be in the core and some not, that are for field of study. And if they're not closely aligned, then it's just extra hours.
Well, I will say that a lot of the conversation has been around how do you make sure that general core, academic disciplinary, and fields of study are complementary? And I think the notion with the academic disciplinary core, again, is to start you on, I guess the way I've been conceiving it is kind of narrowing your path. You know, deciding that, you know, there's an academic discipline that you're interested in, and so you have an academic disciplinary core where you know what core courses you should take. You decide what major, well, then fields of study are going to tell you what courses you should take that specifically are going to count toward that major. So I think they complement each other, but the idea is giving students some guidance where they are, whether that's I know exactly that I want to be a biology major, or you know I know that I'm interested in the physical sciences.
But isn't it the case, at least for the majors where there is a field of study established, that if someone were to convene a committee and say what lower division courses that aren't in the 30-hour general core should students take to prepare for your major, it would be the field of study. So isn't it likely that it's already covered? We don't need this academic discipline core?
Well, again, I have to confess that my knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep because I do external relations. But I think the fields of study tell you what you should take for a specific major. But are there courses within the core that apply more broadly across many majors within that academic discipline? And I think the idea is to have that specified so that a student would be able to, again, maybe I'm still trying to figure out my path, but I have some idea. I take these courses, I get a better idea of, okay, now I know what my major is. I should then focus on those fields of study courses. But I do imagine there's going to be a lot of overlap between the fields of study as well and the disciplinary cores. I know one of the things we've focused on with the fields of study has been really identifying what core courses are within a field of study so that students are aware of that.
I agree. I think there will be overlap because often in the fields of study, because we're working very closely with them, there are math and science courses in those fields of study and the entry level, which would also be core.
Related questions. So right now the core is 42 hours. Field of study, of course, is more than that sometimes, and this could easily exceed 60 hours. This gets part of the statute says that only up to 60 hours can transfer. So how do these contradictory things happen where the core is supposed to transfer, the field of study is supposed to transfer, but, oh, by the way, only 60 hours can transfer?
Well, as I said, I assume there's going to be overlap between the core and the fields of study. So and I'm sure it'll vary by fields of study, but I don't think it's necessarily additive, the 42 plus the fields of study.
I could have concrete examples that it would be over 60 for sure. If somebody did the general core and did a field of study in something where the field of study was pretty deep, then for sure it's going to be over 60 hours, no question. Now, that not for all fields of study, but for some.
Is that an issue now?
Yes. If I can speak to that, I'm Billy Anderson. I'm the curriculum director at Tyler Junior College. And for example, the new psychology field of study that just came out, one of the mathematics class that's required into it has a prerequisite of college algebra, but when that was considered, they didn't consider the prerequisites when they defined the field of study. So you must put your prerequisites in your degree plan. So what happens is, if I'm a psychology major, I go in and I take my field of study courses, but to keep my award at 60 hours, something gets bumped out of the core. In most cases, it's the creative arts component. So as long as I stay a psychology major as a student, I'm good when I transfer, because all my field of study is guaranteed to transfer intact. But if I change my major when I transfer, I'm no longer core complete because I didn't do the creative arts core. And there are many, the music field of study, there are many examples in the new fields of study where there is overlap, and in many cases, as the curriculum director, we can make a student core complete and field of study complete at the same time. There are some cases where you can't. Criminal justice field of study. The student has to choose. At the end, do you want to be field of study complete? Do you want to be core complete? Or by your choice, do you want to take one additional course to be both? But we can't require them to take the one additional course because that would make their award over 60. So yes, there are examples right now where that does happen.
Can I ask about the two different bills? We've been discussing mostly Senate Bill 25, but HB 4018 does spell out the division a little more precisely, but it seems to be a larger shift in terms of how they're arranging. And I'm on page 41 of our bigger packet. In that one, it includes behavioral sciences, and then it leaves sort of these to be determined 6 hours that I imagine are currently the component area option. But then it breaks communications up into partially the general core and partially the disciplinary core. Is there a sense of where there's a leaning there? I know this one is not as far through the process, it seems.
Well, it's been voted out of committee, so it is moving in the House. I would not take either one of these versions as this is the one, because the House and the Senate, as I said, I think they're going to arrive at broadly similar conclusions about how they want to move forward, but there's going to be a lot of difference in the details on things like the 30-12 split, what specifically goes in the core versus the disciplinary cores. So I would not say that, and you're right, we've been talking about SB 25 mostly here. I would not take that as that's the direction the legislature is going to head.
Right, because not even the 30-12, right? This one gives us a 24-18 split on the
Yes,
other option.
and I think there's still a lot of, I mean, that element of it, again, I think is where there's still a lot of decisions to be made, and frankly, a final decision to be made about how and whether to include that split.
Going on that, that was something that I thought of, that the House Bill 4018 proposed core seems to me to be a distinction without a difference. Yeah. I mean, this, as far as I can tell, the only thing this does is does groupings for some of the core by academic area, and that's it. It seems like an awful lot of wasted effort for nothing, to be perfectly honest, because the communication gets split for some reason. The component area options are not called that, but they're basically there. This strikes me as something that does not substantially change the current operations of what we do now.
Let me say something. This has been very helpful for me, and I've been taking notes here. It would be tremendously helpful if maybe, Reinhold, you could help pull together kind of like a summary of what are the major points that we want to make sure are communicated to the bill authors on this. Because again, as I said, mile wide, inch deep, it would be helpful for me to have the specific points and the specific concerns that we want to make sure are relayed. The other thing I would say to all of you is that make sure that you are in contact at your institutions with the appropriate people about this. Because obviously with our universities, we have governmental relations divisions, our community colleges have TAC. It's important, those people are there to act as your, your engagement in the legislative process. So please make sure that you're also communicating with them as well.
Kevin Wood, North Central. I want to say something. I've been sitting here listening, and Marilyn, in my mind, I think it was you, hit the nail on the head. We've got a wild card, and it's the student's ability to choose. And as long as those students have ability to choose at whatever point it is that they can choose, there's going to be excessive hours, there's going to be core complete, there's going to be field of study complete, there's going to be incomplete, and there's that, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but there's nothing that we can do for the legislature or the legislature can do for us with that wild card, and it is a wild card.
I think that's fair, and I think part of what we're going to have to be able to do over the next 2 years, assuming legislation is passed, is be able to show the legislature improvement, but also being clear about the fact that there's only so much that kind of structural issues can address, that it does come down to student choice. And if a student makes a choice to change a major late in the game or to not follow, their advising, that's not something that we can stop. So, and I think I think the legislature is reasonable about that. I mean, they don't expect that we're going to go down to no excess hours over the next 2 years. But if we're able to demonstrate that we are making progress in helping students achieve degrees more efficiently, and if we can do that through our data, I think that's gonna resonate with them. And the commissioner said himself, there's no silver bullet when it comes to addressing transfer issues.
I hate to be the pest in the room. So I'd like to raise an issue that this committee discussed last April and also last September, and that's on the new handouts, page 14, about the lower quarter of the page. So there's point 2. Point 2 reads, the core curriculum shall be consistent with the Common Course numbering system approved by the board and with the statement, recommendations, and rules issued by the board. As just to remind everybody that this is something that we spent considerable time talking about in committee here, and I'd like to suggest this might be a time to get this thing clarified once and for all as to what this phrasing actually means. Does this mean that it has to be in the Common Course numbering system and that four-year universities are not trusted to create their own core courses? Or does it mean that innovation can be done? We'd had this discussion in the past, and I think this might be a time to ask the legislature to get this clarified once and for all, whatever the decision is.
John, if you would, in our conversations regarding that, we both shared comments regarding the impact potentially on honors curriculum, I believe. Would you want to describe that for the group again, please?
Okay, so here I'm going on very old memories here, which is a very bad sign because you're accessing the same files where the Spice Girls are. So right now, if there's a lot of four-year universities have honors courses as part of the university core. And this is not part, technically, of the Common Course numbering system. And so the plain language of the statute would seem to forbid, for example, that honors courses could not be counted as core. That's one example of many that we could cite of things that are typical of four universities for things that are in the core.
Thank you, John.
Another example that I'll put out is that a number of institutions have freshman seminar courses that they use in their component area option right now that are not listed in the ACGM.
Happy to talk about other bills if it won't be a letdown.
I would like to pause for a moment before we move on there. Does coordinating board staff have any comment about the concern about the information that John has raised on page 14 under the component or description of Texas Common Course numbering system and its impact?
We agree that that would be nice to clarify what that is, what that means. So that is one of the major bullets which I put down for, as we discussed, come up with the bullets. I think some of the, and there are different ways to clarify that. For example, the honors courses, I don't know why they, and it may well be, but why they could not be equivalent to a TCCNS course. It's the same course, it's the same material, it's just for a different kind of student. So I don't see that as necessarily, that's a technical thing. Why they are not why they could not be equivalent to that. But yes, there would be clarification of that sort. It goes back to the question: is it as ACGM courses and ACGM courses only, or is it lower division and lower division courses only? And those are the questions we discussed in fair depth, but we don't have a clarification about that. Freshman seminar courses are still lower division courses, but they're not in the ACGM. So that is an example of that distinction. And so we are interested in that just as much as you are.
Thank you. John, did you hint that you wanted to perhaps reflect on other legislation that's coming before us? Is there anything else?
Well, really just one other issue I'd bring up that might be of interest to y'all. There's also been a lot of focus on open educational resources this session. You may recall that last session we received funding here at the Coordinating Board for the OER grants. The Senate version of the appropriations bill includes additional funding for those OER grants, as well as funding for an OER repository. This was part of the legislation last session required us to study the feasibility of such an OER repository. And so our conclusion was that it was something that could be done and would be beneficial to the state. Chairman Turner has legislation that would authorize the creation of this repository. It's been voted out of committee. So there does seem to be a lot of interest in expanding OER. Whenever there was a hearing on this, it was just a love fest from members in terms of making these materials more widely available for students. So I do anticipate that we're going to see some more grant money and more than likely funding to start up this OER repository. Now, currently, the appropriations bill is in conference, so the Senate and House members are working out their differences on the bills, but we expect probably mid-May is when we'll actually see the work that comes out of that committee. And that being said, if there's any other issue that you're hearing about in the legislature, if there are any other bills that you have a perspective on or have any questions on, I'd be happy to answer what I can.
John, do you know the date, or is it on the calendar yet for when 4018 and 25 will be voted on?
So nothing's been set yet. So 25 is through the Senate.
Right.
So it goes over to the House. There are options at that point. Chairman Turner could pick it up and use that as the vehicle for he can substitute in his language into 25 and move it that way. 4018, again, was passed by the committee. I do not believe so. After a bill's passed out of committee, it goes to the calendars committee to be placed on a calendar for when it will be heard. That has not happened yet. There are some deadlines that are coming up that are relevant. So May 7th is the last day for a House bill to be placed on a calendar. So in order for a House bill to be moving, it has to be on a calendar by May 7th. Now, that's not as limiting a factor as you might think, because again, they can pick up the Senate bill in the House and move that forward, and a Senate bill is not subject to those same restrictions. They could offer it as an amendment to another bill. So there are these deadlines that start to fall, but the hard deadline is May 28th, I believe, which is the last day of session. So anything that is not done by then is officially dead. And then you get into the veto period, so you really can't count your chickens until the end of June.
Since we're discussing timeframes, I just want to reiterate one more time what Mr. Brown was saying about the timeframes that it would take us to implement this for IHEs, because I know when you read it, it sounds like since you have a start of 2021 that gives us 2 years, but it really doesn't, because what happens is, according to this, the co-board has to have time to meet and develop the academic discipline core. I don't care how quickly that they do that. The curriculum process at most IHEs is done the fall prior to the academic year that it will be in place, because we have to have our catalogs up in spring for advising for the next fall. So I don't care how quickly that the co-board worked in 19, the reality is that my IHE would be taking every single academic transfer award that we have through our curriculum process in fall of 20. That time frame from us is from the Thursday after Labor Day till the first Thursday in December. So, in order to have it up in catalog for the following year. So if it were to take co-board a year to come up with their academic discipline plan, which is conceivable because they have to pull in groups like this one of members to look at that. If it took them a year, then we would have a matter of months to turn all of our awards. Even if we were pre-planning for the contingency, we still could not go through the actual process until that fall before and in a very short time period. I think the time is a real issue here.
I'll add that, well, first of all, our policy, of course, is that students proceed and complete on the catalog in which they started. So it's really the entering students that are at risk here. But our undergraduate catalog is changed every 2 years. So it's on the even numbered years. So right now we're on the 1820 catalog. If we get instructions in 20, it's too late for the 2022 catalog, so they would start in the 22-24 catalog.
Do we have any other questions for our guests regarding the legislative session and bills that are proposed or in progress?
I have just one more question. So, John, in your what would you predict? Do you think there will be a decision made by May 28th, or that it would die?
Let me get my crystal ball. I think legislation is going to pass. The final form of that legislation, I think, is not clear at all right now, particularly in regards to the core. I think there's certainly a possibility that they'll simply remove any of the core changes to these bills. Because again, that does seem to be the biggest point of contention in both bills.
You mentioned earlier a summary would be useful.
Yes.
Would these comments here summarized into some draft still be useful to you?
Absolutely be useful to us. We communicate regularly with the bill authors and with other members who are involved in this issue. As I said, we were a part of the work group. It seems like now kind of the work is shifting over to the House side. So that's where, we need to target our communication.
Yeah, I think it's very timely, this meeting. Listening to the discussion, we will have to come up with this bulleted list, if you will, of main concerns very quickly so that our agency leaders have them Monday morning going forward with the discussion. Staff here, in terms of procedure, always gets the new bills and the new versions of the bills, and we do bill analyses where we write down what's in the bill and what are possible concerns. So that's part of our routine work right now. It's and that has a very quick turnaround. I know that the bill analysis for the new version we did last night and send it forward. So this list from the UEAC will go into that workflow right away. And so I think it's a very useful discussion.
John, on our agenda, there are a list of 5 bills, and I think we've talked mostly about one, but you've also talked about 2 others. But there are 2 other House bills, 1933 and 3607, that haven't been mentioned yet. I don't know whether the plan is to eventually get to those, or they're dead, or I don't.
Let me, so you said 1933. Oh, that's Donna Howard's bill?
Yes.
So, okay, got it. So that's the bill, okay, so
Textbooks.
include textbook costs in tuition and fees. That bill was heard almost a month ago, and I know that has been voted out of committee. I'm not aware of any Senate companion to that bill, so the only bill that's moving is the Donna Howard bill. Again, I don't believe it's been placed on a calendar, so I'll have to go back and check to be sure. But it's passed, basically it's where it needs to be right now. As I mentioned, bills have to be at least out of committee by May 6th. Well, this one's out of committee. So it is in a position to potentially move.
And the gist of the bill is to say that institutions would increase tuition and fees to cover the cost of textbooks so that students wouldn't have to pay them outside of tuition, or hopefully it's not to say that some of the money they're currently paying for tuition would be diverted to textbooks.
My understanding is that you would be allowed to include textbooks as you set your tuition and fees. And I also understand it to be, it's not required, but it's optional.
And there's an opt-out.
Yes.
Yeah. For the student, an opt-out.
The student can opt out, yes. And then 3607. So this is an Yvonne Davis bill requiring us to study methods to reduce textbook and course material costs. In our feedback to the author, we did recommend pushing back the due date because it was a very aggressive due date for having the report. We also noted that we've already done a lot of study that would be relevant to this report through our OER report and through others. So we would likely incorporate that material into this. Now, this bill, I don't believe has been voted out of committee. But I'd have to verify on that one. Was it? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was voted out of committee. It's gone to local and consent. So that's the calendar for relatively non-controversial bills, but it has not been brought up on the floor yet.
And just going back to 1933, I haven't read the bill, but does this mean that if students and institutions agree that they're going to pay tuition for the books, that the institution buys the books and hands them to the students when they come to class, or other materials, or they have a voucher that they go to the bookstore to get the books? Or
I don't think that the bill is that prescriptive. I know it does have rulemaking, so likely that would have to be discussed in a rulemaking process for how specific we wanted to be in terms of how that would work, or whether we wanted to leave it to institutions to make that determination.
Okay.
Yeah, it talks about textbook affordability programs. So an institution may establish a program for textbook affordability, and so it would be probably different from institution to institution, but the rules would set guidelines for that. Pardon me?
Trying to think of the institutional overhead of implementation as well as the actual cost of the materials. Yeah.
Right, and it does not require an institution to do this, so.
Yeah, and we are mandated, the coordinating board is required to make rules for administration of the textbook affordability program. So presumably we would set at least some standards that institutions would then be bound by.
Other questions?
Okay, thank you so much for your time, John, and for your insight as to some of these bills that we're wrestling with. Any other thoughts?
Just thank you. I spend most of my time down at the Capitol, so actually being able to hear from people who are kind of the boots on the ground in terms of these issues is very helpful in terms of making sure that we adopt good policy. So I really appreciate your feedback.
Great, thank you.
Go.
Okay, we are scheduled to break for lunch at noon in about 20 minutes. Do we want to continue the discussion now or move on to the agenda? Do we want to break for lunch now? What is the will of the group?
If it's possible to actually finish the meeting before lunch, I'd be all in favor of that.
Second. All right. So let's kind of put this on the back burner for just a few minutes while we are organizing our individual thoughts, and we'll move on to agenda item 6, and then we'll circle back.
And agenda item 6 is consideration of future work and meeting dates. So I would direct everyone to page 51 of your handout for this meeting. And first of all, note that our fall 19 meeting, of course, this is our goal is our fall 19 meeting would be on September 20th at 10 a.m. here at the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board offices. And our spring 19 meeting would be April 17th, 2020 at that same time and same location. As we've observed in the past, sometimes we find that there are issues with calendar. Does anyone see a significant issue with these dates? Great work. It's so hard to develop calendars a year out not knowing what's on the agenda. So those dates, if you could, for those of you that are coming back next year, to make sure to include those on your schedules, to reserve those dates and times. A point of, to make sure everyone is aware, the report of activities of the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee to the Committee on Workforce and Academic Success is scheduled for June 19th, 2019, and either Julia or I will present the information on behalf of this committee, which I understand is basically the magnitude of work that's been completed, the amount of investment and things such as that. But would you reflect on that for a moment, Reinhold?
Yes, we do it annually. It's a fairly short thing. It's, I think, officially 5 minutes report. We will work with your co-chairs to create a slide for it, maybe, and help gather the bullets from the past work. Basically, we want to tell the board about the important outcomes of this meeting, which is, it's very useful as a yearly, especially this year, it will be informative to them. They need to know what work informs all the work that goes to them, because they have the final decision making. And so they need to have a good background where the ideas come from. So that is the purpose of it, and again, we will send out an email for the cost. So I have to next week start making my report, which includes some data, what is the cost of the committee. There is a cost to what you do, so please fill that out so I can report that fairly correctly and put the results in perspective to the effort.
This agenda item includes setting dates, but also determining future work.
Yes, so for example, I got an email to discuss field of studies, and we can do that as far as the legislation is concerned, because field of study is part of the transferability. But if you have certain items and you want to put emphasis on for the next meeting, we can talk about this now. You also can email me that ahead of time. So what I'm envisioning to do is, because these statutes are changing daily, I will try to keep you up going forward with what I hear about what versions come out, and I will email that to you. So if I have a new version and a new development in this, I hope to convey that to you, because you are now informed and asked to get with your institutional leadership. So I will try that. And from that, we probably new items will come for September, because if we get something new, or if we don't get something new, we probably need to talk about it.
Yes, I was just going to add to that, Reinhold, that I think definitely John Wyatt gave us a great kind of introduction to the legislation that's coming forward that impacts undergraduate education, and no doubt, as if or when that legislation moves to the point of approval and signature, we would probably want an update specifically about those pieces of legislation at our meeting in September. Does that sound agreeable to all? Because we'll be working with that directly as if or when legislation is approved and signed. Other thoughts on work that you would like to see the committee explore, consider, discuss in it's hard to say this, 2019, 2020. This is a quiet group today. One can tell it's April and we're nearing commencement season.
Well, there's so much uncertainty in a way, as we now know, and all of that requires a lot of work for everybody. So we will see.
Reinhold, I'm curious about where the issue that we talked about last time, and we talked about a little bit this time about removing the CAO. Is that moving? Is that dead? Where is it headed? We're still talking about it, so I assume it's not, even though there's no legislation about it at this time, there's some thought that the coordinating board may want to make a recommendation like this. Where is this going?
Well, we'll see what the legislator comes up with. If the CAO is gone through the legislation, we cannot change it anymore.
Is there a bill that addresses it?
No, I haven't seen this. These are the bills which address this. If, let's say, nothing comes out of this, which is one possibility, if they don't decide on anything, then we have a recommendation from UEAC to go forward, and so we haven't given up on that. But I assume that something will come out of this, but we'll see what that is in the end. And so the UEAC will have to respond to this in some form or fashion, and so that's why I plan to keep you updated. And we may have to move very quickly, and so because of the timelines. And in that case, we can hold a special meeting like we did in January before September, if that is. And I know there are time constraints on your workload with the summer or on availability, but we will try to work with that.
So is that, being new, has that been a recommendation or approved to remove that, remove those?
Oh, I'm sorry. No. So absent any legislative changes, we have rules beside the statute, and currently the statute only sets 42 semester credit hours, and the structure of the core is governed by rules, which were worked out some years ago. Now, rules can be changed by the coordinating board, by the board of the coordinating board, as is the fact for core curriculum statute requires negotiated rulemaking for the core, but it's still a rulemaking change. And so the way that works is we put forward, the coordinating board would put forward a straw man of rules. A group is convened from across the state, and they debate the rule changes, and then those changes go to our board. And the recommendation from the UEAC was to restructure the rules for the component area option as they're written right now, to allow certain things, like certain courses which are not allowed right now in the core. Decouple the 6 hours of the component area option from the rest of the definitions for the core to include a broader spectrum of courses. And that was done in September, I think. So if you go...
If I could, Reinhold, thinking of Larry's point there, is it worthy of, in this summary information that we're providing to John for legislative relationships, is it of value to have any input from the UEAC regarding the role or potential location of the CAO and the proposed change in the legislation right now? Does anyone have thoughts on if CAO were going to continue as it currently is included? Is there a place for it?
I was under the naive assumption that the component area option was being spiked by these bills, that it was just being done away with completely. That was my naive impression based on the statute, proposed statute.
So what we might suggest to John to take back to the legislature is to clarify the discrepancy between the 24 and the 30 in the gen ed, and to clarify the 12 hours. And if something is not specified, like social behavioral science or CAO, that at least be alluded to in terms of it's up to the institution. But I think all 42 hours need to be accounted for specifically.
Thank you, Julie. That was exactly where I was going with that, especially when we look at that only 24 hours out of the first 30 have been clearly articulated is the piece that I was looking at as well. But I think if there's the will of the group to include some kind of reference to that for coordinating board staff, I think that's worthy.
So I could move that we recommend that social behavioral sciences be included as an additional required part of the general course, so that would now specify 27 instead of 24?
My thought would be it would not, we are providing input in the summary document that coordinating board staff would then provide as they consider this, as these bills move forward. I don't know that I was thinking so stringently that it would have to be something that would go through a parliamentary process.
Right. So I noted down throughout the discussion today that the SBS, as we call it, is missing. And where is it, and does it need to be there? So, I mean, that's the issue. And the legislator then can think about that. The same could be said about the component area option. I mean, we haven't discussed that. What is the value of it, or should it be in that accounting, be part of that accounting? So that would be something you could say, how you see this in terms of implementing the core on the ground in the end.
Well, the more I think about it, and this is just me speaking for me and my institution, I think that 30 hours does need to be explicated because it is a general core. So whether that's where SBS goes or whether that's part of the 3 hours of the CAO and 3 hours go in the gen, I think to protect the students, that 30 hours has to be in black and white.
Can I add one more thought about having all 60 hours nailed down, whether it's in the general core, the academic core, or the field of study, really precludes students from taking a minor after they go to a four-year institution. So think about most minors have a good deal of lower level courses in them. So a minor in a language, a minor in dance or in arts or something like that. And we're really cutting off options for students and pushing their free electives as well to their junior and senior year, where again, they're gonna possibly decide they need to change majors because they tried something else. They didn't have that ability to explore earlier on. And they're paying more for those credit hours.
So that's a good point. On our campus, to get a four-year degree, students are required to have a minimum of 54 upper division hours. And 60 hours in residence. So coming in with 60 hours of lower division courses makes it hard to work in a lot of fields. Yeah.
At Texas Tech, a third of our undergraduates are required to have a minor. All the students in arts and sciences are.
Can I clarify also, again, we are talking about the Senate bill when we say we need more precision, right? Because the House bill has it broken down, although they still don't talk about the CAO specifically, other than to say subjects to be determined.
Yes, as we've been, I believe, I'll speak for Julie here, as we look at it, we're talking about Senate Bill 25 and looking at the 30 semester credit hours of general core curriculum, which includes only the designation of 24 hours of specific requirements, and that just concerning that we don't see what the other 6 should be. And our colleagues have mentioned issues similar to such as and including the social and behavioral sciences, the content area option, those kinds of issues. And I think the issue that we were thinking about most directly was the relationship to Senate Bill 25.
Okay, thank you.
This will be a popular question at this point in the meeting. Lunch is available, and thank you again for the coordinating board staff for bringing that together for us. We've also concluded our agenda, but I'm going to take one point of personal privilege. I would like to acknowledge the effort of the following, as this is their last coordinating board undergraduate education advisory committee meeting. And so please join me in thanking, of course, Julie Penley from El Paso Community College, Edward Byron from Victoria College, Billy Anderson from Tyler Junior College, Marilyn Kaplan from the University of Texas at Dallas. Unable to be with us today, Elizabeth, I believe was she ill today? Elizabeth Garcia from West Texas A&M, and Richard Miller, who we believe is out of the country?
Italy?
Oh, Italy.
Hardship.
So join me in thanking our and then as well Janet, and I probably Torello from Stephen F. Austin State University, and Randy Tanglin from Austin College. Please join me in thanking these dedicated members of our Higher Education Committee for their work.
And as I like to add to that, once you're a UEAC member, you are sort of always part of UEAC. You are a UEAC alum. You stay in my address list as UEAC alum. So if you have any concerns, or if you listen to meetings later on, or if you have questions what we do, please stay in touch. That is incredibly helpful to us. And if you have any other questions, which I know happens, then you also, I may not be able to answer it, but you have an access point, and I will do my best to find the answer for it. So that's part of your alumni-ship. We don't have a magazine, but you can always call me.
I don't know that any of us were told that once we're a UEAC member, we're always a UEAC member when we decided and volunteered to be a part of this. So thank you as well to our coordinating board staff for their work throughout the year and coordinating the work of this committee, especially now that I found out you only learned of the update to the Senate Bill 25 last night, and we're working on those issues at the same time. At this point, I would now this is kind of an interesting, usually we adjourn and go, we go to lunch and then adjourn following. I would welcome a motion to adjourn and then enjoy lunch before we return to our campuses for the remainder of the spring term.
I so move.
We have.
Second.
It has been moved and second that we adjourn this meeting of the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. All in favor, please respond by saying aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? If not, thank you and have a wonderful remainder of spring term. Let's remember, lunch has been available and we have committed.
Yes. No,